good evening. It's a pleasure and a very big honor to be able to present a lecture for the Centro Sefarat in Madrid. Firstly, I need to introduce myself. So my name is Szymon Pietrzykowski. I am a historian, worker of the educational department at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and I will be presenting a lecture about the Spanish Civil War in the archival collection of this institution that I am working at the moment, that I am representing, that is the Jewish Historical Institute, located in Warsaw. And it is one of the most important institutes researching the history, the culture of Jews in Poland at various historical periods. Obviously during the Second World War, during the German occupation, and during the Holocaust, but also the post-war history and the earlier periods. So I will help myself with a presentation with multiple slides. So let's begin with the first one. So you can see right here a picture that's presenting the Warsaw residence camp in the village of Siódrańce near Vilna. It was the part of the Skiv camp. Skiv was a youth section of the Bund Party. Bund Party was one of the many Jewish political parties operating before, during and after Second World War. They were optioning for the full-scale Jewish autonomy within the national borders of Central and Eastern European countries. And you can see a characteristic element, that is a white banner with the famous slogan, "No passaran, they shall not pass," which is visible in the background. So this picture was taken probably when the Spanish Civil War was happening, and it was also very much discussed amongst the Polish Jews within the Polish Jewish community. On the second following slide, we've got the basic information about the collection on which my today's presentation will be based. This is a collection with reference number 332 called Civil War in Spain. Initiator of this collection was Edward Ephraim Wózek, who was a volunteer, a fighter at the international brigades himself, and the circumstance for creating this source was the round 30th anniversary of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, the creation of the Polish brigade named after Jarosław Dąbrowski, and its members were commonly referred to as Dąbrowszczaks. So the Civil Spanish War is a collection consisting of several hundred pages, divided to several boxes and 27 archival units. And among those documents, we've got various data. So, for example, right here in the photo on the left, we can see, among other things, a list of Jewish volunteers of the international brigades who arrived in Spain based on estimates made at that time, at the end of 1960s. And the photo in the middle, there is a list of Jewish participants of the Spanish Civil War from A to Z, and this mentioned list was systematically updated, as is evidenced in the photo on the right. Yes, so we've got also questionnaires with multiple questions, such as the basic ones. So first name and last name, used pseudonyms or monikers by the volunteers, date and place of birth, party affiliation before arriving in Spain, during the Spanish Civil War, and in current times, from what country and under what circumstances did they come to Spain, who or which comrades does they remember from the group that came and fought in Spain, in which unit they fought, the names of units commanders or political commissars, on what fronts and in what battles did they fight, names of those killed in battle, what functions did they perform, and what ranks did they hold, whether they were wounded, on what fronts, and when, if it occurred at all, what was the attitude of the Spanish population towards the Jewish volunteers, and this reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Many of the Spanish people weren't aware of the volunteers' Jewish origins. Where did they stay from the end of the war in Spain till the outbreak of World War II? What camps and prison were they eventually in? And the Jewish volunteers' fate between the crucial years of 1939 and 1945, the present-day activities, and also additional information. We've got also relations, and this is obviously the most interesting part of this collection, and I will discuss this in more detail later in my speech. Those relations, those memoirs, those accounts are mostly in Polish or Yiddish. We've got also the original press from years 1936 and 1939, and I will also discuss this issue later. So, for example, right here, we have an article, press clipping from Neue Leben. Neue Leben was the most important Yiddish language newspaper that was distributed after 1945 in post-war Poland. So this is a clipping from mid-60s, from 1967. And on the right side, we can see an article about Henryk Toruńczyk, who was also one of the combatants, one of the fighters of the international brigades, and he was one of the most important Communistic Party apparatchik. So this is an obituary published after his death. And we've got also another examples of the post-war later newspapers, which were mostly left-oriented newspapers that discuss the 30th anniversary of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. So these are the Russian Soviets one. We've got also one Eastern German newspaper, and a French one, obviously closely associated to the communist party. We've got also interesting artifacts, and one of these artifacts is, for example, the address book of Dąbrowszczaks, members of the Dąbrowski company of Jewish origin, living in Poland after 1945, and the vast majority of them lived in Warsaw, the Polish capital, the largest Jewish community. Some of them also settled in Lower Silesia. Before 1945, it was the former Third Reich. It was in the German territory, but after 1945, in such places as Wrocław, Wałbrzych, Legnica or Dzierżoniów, there was a dynamically developing Jewish community centers in the first years after the end of the war, until the turn of the 1940s and 1950s, when the growing anti-Semitism and Stalinist totalitarianism forced them to mass immigration via Western Europe, USA or Israel. We've got also maps, and we can see maps with marked front lines and the names of the cities, the most important battleground, written obviously in Yiddish. And in this slide you can see posters on the occasion of the 30th anniversary celebrations of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in Israel. So those posters featured, for example, a reproduction of Picasso's famous painting Guernica, or equally famous black and white photograph by Robert Capa on Saturday, September 5th, 1936, depicting the death of a soldier fighting on the side of the Republic during the Battle of Cerro Muriano. It was the falling soldier, and this falling soldier is believed to be the anarchist militiaman Federico Borel Garcia. On the left side we can see a leaflet with the schedule. On the right side we can see a leaflet with the schedule of anniversary celebrations taking place in Israel. And we can also see invitations to the anniversary celebrations that were held in Poland, East Germany, Israel and USSR, addressed directly to Edward Ephraim Wózek, about whom I mentioned to you before. At least 35,000 volunteers from about 50 countries fought in the ranks of the international brigades during the Spanish Civil War. Up to 400 of them were Jews or people of Jewish origins. That was about 10% of the total number of fighters. Most of them were communists or non-party people sympathizing to a certain extent with communism or leftist ideology. So they were the so-called fellow travelers or poputchiks, but they were also socialists, social democrats, anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, anti-Stalinist Marxists, Trotskyists. In the case of volunteers of Jewish origin, also, although to a lesser extent, they were Bundists or representatives of the Zionist left. They came from multiple countries, from different directions. So, for example, they were French, came from France, from Belgium, from Poland, from then Palestine, from the United States, Great Britain, the Balkans, the USSR, and other countries. When we are talking about the Jewish volunteers of the international brigades, a very important question is the terminology. So what we understand as Jewishness, and it could be understood as ethnicity. So it was the broadest of categorizations, encompassing volunteers from all countries, from east and west, from north and south, often assigned with hindsight, post factum, long years after the events. It is also an identification, referring in most cases to Eastern European Jews who consider themselves a Jewish minority within their own countries and de facto officially having such status. And what is important is the fact that Jewishness was not necessarily the main motivation for people of Jewish origin to take up combat in the international brigades. At that very moment, in late 30s, but the Jewishness was emphasized by the veterans in later years, obviously in consequence of the Holocaust. Important was also the migration experience, because most volunteers, including especially those of Jewish origin, did not come from their countries of birth, but rather from second or subsequent places of residence. This is particularly relevant to people from Central and Eastern Europe. For them, taking up the fight in Spain can be understood as a form of escape from anti-Semitism or a precarious economic position, or the ever-present possibility of deportation and other unfavorable circumstances. Also, another issue was politics and propaganda, especially in relation to political viewpoints. So the Jews, and not only the Jews, were promoting the ideas and the tactics of popular fronts in case of Comintern members, but also Marxist criticism of Stalinism, so the important POUM party. So the motivations to take up arms in general was first and foremost the fight against fascism. A Spanish Civil War was commonly viewed as a battle between the forces of the free and democratic world versus representatives of fascism and tyranny. So Franco, the Third Reich, at Italy, it was believed to be a kind of prelude or even the first battle of World War II. Fight in Spain was believed to be an extension, reflection, or continuation of the struggle in home countries from which the volunteers came. So it was a belief that first we will retake Madrid, then Warsaw, Berlin, Rome, so other capitals in undemocratic countries, carrying out party's order. So this is another issue, another motivation. It was valid especially in relation to members of communist parties or members of the Comintern, seeking adventure, borderline emotions as a way of life. So amongst the ranks of the international brigades, there were the so-called professional revolutionaries. It was also a not so small amount. And also another motivation is the desire to improve one's status, the fight for dignity. The volunteers were mostly ethnic minorities, people from lower social classes, people who found themselves in a difficult financial situation. So we've got also motivations that were especially important from the Jewish perspective, from the specific Jewish perspectives. So this motivation were fight against fascism, Nazism, and special emphasis was put on the racist aspects of anti-Jewish policy in the Third Reich, which for the Jews constitute a kind of existential threat. Also, they were fighting the stereotype of Jewish passivity, so avoiding combat, desertions, low combat value, or evading the army as typical Jewish traits, behavioral patterns. Important were the ideological motivations, such as belief in communism as the only effective path leading to emancipation, improving one's social, political, or economic status. Also, reaction to the situation of the Jewish minorities in countries of origin or actual resistance. So, persecution of Jews in the Third Reich, anti-Semitic policy towards Jews conducted by the Sanacja government in the final years of the Second Polish Republic, the kind of civil war between the governing Sanacja, members of Sanacja, and Index, the National Democrats that were in opposition. And also we've got a series of pogroms taking place in Poland in the mid-1930s as a result of the worsening economic situation. And those pogroms happen in such places as Przytyk, Brześć nad Bugiem, Minsk Mazowiecki, and other places. Also, another motivation was the ability to act in conspiracy or under pressure, and it was the case of a Polish communist whose party was officially banned in the interwar Poland, and they have to go underground. Therefore, they've got the important and desirable experience. And the road to Spain for many fighters was long, twisted, and complicated. They had to cross borders illegally many times, risking arrest and imprisonment. And the picture you can see On the right side is an article written by Isser Wilf, who was a fighter, a volunteer himself, and this is about his difficult and dangerous route leading to Spain. Some of the fighters were to take part in the People Olympics in Barcelona, which were to start on July 19, 1936, as a response to the official Olympics in Berlin, hosted by the Nazis. But unfortunately, General Franco's coup d'etat prevented it from happening, and some of the athletes managed to evacuate, but others fought in the defense of the city on the barricade, and later they decided to go to the front. And one of such people were Nahum Wojnryd, and right here is a fragment of his testimony on the fighting in Barcelona in July 1936 that I translated for you from Polish, and this testimony is as follows. In June 1936, I went with the sports club Jask, of which I was a member, to the International People's Olympic, which were to be held in Barcelona, since the Spanish generals, headed by General Franco, in the meantime had prepared a revolt against the legal government of the Spanish Republic. The Olympics were cancelled. A great many athletes went home, but I stayed in Barcelona. In July 1819, the fascists opened fire against the Republic. We set up barricades in the street of Barcelona. The Catalan police were with us, and the gendarmerie and the carabineros fought together with the fascists against us. The fighting on the barricades lasted several days. On the morning of July 22nd, the fascists surrendered. On July 23rd, I left with the first De Barrio Troiba column for the Aragonese front. Next, we've got a selected biography of the fighters. Such fighters as Samuel Balbin, Robert Biel, and Zyskind Zygmunt Koppel. So Samuel Balbin was born in the city of Tomaszów Mazowiecki. As a young boy, he worked as a tailor in Łódź. He was active in trade unions. He emigrated to the USA. From 1932, he settled in Nancy, France, as a sympathizer of the French Communistic Party. He was active on the Jewish street. In 1937, he left for Spain, where he fought until 1939. On February 22nd, 1942, he was shot by the Germans in Mont Valérien, near Paris. In his last letter, he wrote, "Do not mourn me, continue the path of my best comrades fighting for freedom. I am sure that we will fight until the final victory," and the picture of Samuel Balbin is visible. Another person is Robert Biel, and same as Balbin, he was a member of the French resistance. And right here we can see the Lorraine cross, the official symbol of the resistors in France and the French colonies. So Robert Biel was born in Łódź. As a 13-year-old boy, he left Poland and went to Palestine, but after some time he left Palestine and went to Egypt, and from there to Australia. However, he couldn't get used to life in this country, and after some time he returned to Europe. He settled in Paris. In 1936 he joined the revolutionary movement in France. He went to Spain at the end of 1936, where he fought as a second lieutenant and led a transport unit. He participated in the additional work of the first Jewish newspaper in France, the Riedischer Freiheitskämpfer, so the Jewish freedom fighter. This is a direct translation of the title. After the end of the war in Spain, he returned to Paris, where he was active in the revolutionary movement on the Jewish street. During World War II, he became involved as a translator with the English army in France. During the occupation of France, he was a liaison between partisan groups, both in occupied France and in France under the Vichy government. Then he became one of the initiators of the partisan movement in Marseille. On June 5th, 1942, he left Marseille for Paris to obtain weapons. He was then arrested by the Gestapo. When he felt that he was losing his nerves and balance after the tortures, he decided to jump out of the prison window and died immediately on the spot. So Biel and Balbin were the members of the resistance, and there is another biography, another experience by Zygmunt Zyskind Koppel, who was born in Kalisz. He was a shoemaker by profession. From 1926 he was a member of Communist Union of Polish Youth. Then he became a member of the Communist Party of Poland. In 1931 he served a 4-year prison sentence. In years 1935-1937 he was active as a member of the Communistic Party functioning illegally in Łódź. In December 1937 he illegally left Poland for France through Germany and Belgium with the consent of the authorities from the Communistic Party. From 1938 he fought in Spain in the Botwin campaign. In June of that year he fought on the front of the Ebro River. In December 1938 he returned illegally to France, where in May 1939 he was interned. He stayed in camps in continental France and in colonies in Africa. In 1943, after being released, he left Africa for the USSR. He fought in the First Polish Army. When he reached Warsaw, he was drawn into the Internal Security Corps. So the volunteers, the Jewish volunteers, the fighters from the international brigades were displaced stateless persons, and also they were victims of the camps. Such was the fate of, for example, Shia Rahman, that you can see on another slide. So Shia Rahman was born in Warsaw and emigrated with his family to France. There he joined the Communist Youth Organization and became an active revolutionary. Due to his revolutionary activities, he was expelled from the country in 1929. After his father had died in France earlier, Szyja had to become the head of the family out of necessity. He illegally installed himself with his family in Belgium and became a very active revolutionary in Brussels as well. He left for Spain in 1936. He fought on the front but was seriously wounded and had to return to Belgium. In 1940 he left for France, where he was interned in a camp in the city of Archival. He managed to escape and illegally entered Belgium, where he got involved in the resistance movement. He was a deputy commander of the mobile partisan corps in Belgium. On February 25th, he was arrested and sent to various that is concentration camps in Germany. In 1944, he was murdered in Mauthausen. Yeah, and important elements of this documentation collection is the press, is the Jewish wartime press. So, for example, you can see right here a page from the Freedom Volunteer, the Freiheitskämpfer. So this was this paper which already mentioned before. Robert Beale was one of the editors. And you can also see another clippings, another articles. So these were about the members, the commanders of the units, some political texts, some articles about the conduct of the fights, the situation at the front. There are also illustrations, there are also group photos, which are a very important historical source. There is another biograms, and mostly these are obituaries dedicated to the memory of the fallen comrades. We've got also, you can see on the right, a copy, example of a Spanish language publication published in late 1937 and distributed in early 1938. It was edited by Gina Meden, a very important Bund supporter and political activist. And this publication is called The Jewish Volunteers of Freedom. It was addressed directly to the people of Spain to inform them about the activity and the contribution of the Jewish members of the international brigade. So it was a very important publication. And right here you can see the cover of Dąbrowszczak. It was an official media outlet of Polish volunteers of the Republican Spanish Army. You can also see the message on the cover. So it's in Spanish and in Polish. In Polish it means za wolność naszą i waszą. So it could be translated to English as for yours and our freedom. Yeah. So the meaning was that the Poles are fighting for the Spain, and also indirectly they are fighting in their own interest for the liberation of their own country, for the liberation of Poland. So this is a very important and moving symbol of international fight for freedom and the international solidarity. And what you see right here is an original red, yellow, purple banner that is a part of the collection at the Jewish Historical Institute. And I think, in fact, this is the most important artifact related to the Spanish Civil War. This is a banner of the Jewish company or a brigade operating within the ranks of the international brigades that was named after Naftali Botwin. Yeah, and in this case we need to discuss about the origins and the reasons for the establishment of a special Jewish military unit. So as early as 1936, Albert Nahumi Weitz, who was a communist born in Russia, who grew up in Palestine and later emigrated to Paris in 1932, and he suggested the creation of a separate Jewish unit. The idea was not taken up immediately, and Nahumi himself died soon afterward. He perished in January 1937 during fighting in the Madrid university town, but this very idea was implemented later on December 12, 1937 in Tardadientes, when the Jewish company named after Naftali Botwin, about whom I will tell you something more later, was formed from the Palafox 2nd Battalion, and there were complex motivations behind the creation of this battalion. So first and foremost, the reorganization of the international brigades more along national lines, where representatives of national minorities would have their own units. So units consisting of Ukrainians, Jews, Belarusians, and so on. Also addressing the importance of the issue of racist anti-Semitism. The approach of Moscow and the Comintern to this issue was rather ambiguous, because they mostly see class, not race. Combating the stereotype of Jewish passivity among non-Jews, influencing Jewish communities in Europe and around the world by encouraging recruitments or support for the international brigades, by promoting historical activity such as collecting accounts, memoir, testimonies from the front. And for example, there was also a project to create a museum dedicated to the Jewish fighters in Paris. Also counteracting the decline in interest in the conflict and increasing difficulties in recruitment. So the primacy of propaganda or logistical goals over more subjective ones. Also important was combating anti-Semitism or manifestations of xenophobia, national frictions within the battalion. It was mentioned in the report by General Karol Świerczewski, known under the pseudonym Walter, from January 1938. And what is also interesting in relation to this institution that I am representing and talking about, so the Jewish Historical Institute, the street running through a Jewish Historical Institute was named after General Karol Świerczewski for a long time during the communist rule. After the democratic transformation in 1989, it was renamed to Solidarity Avenue, Aleja Solidarności, to honor the Polish opposition movement in the 1980s. And in pre-war era and during the war, the German occupation and the Holocaust, the name of the street was Leszno, and it was one of the main arteries of the Warsaw Ghetto. Yeah, and each unit among those more national lines had got its own patron, and these patrons were not random people, but were closely connected to the history of a given nation with a significant meaning to them. And here are some of the cases. For example, there was Jarosław Dąbrowski, so as I am mentioned frequently, the patron of the Dąbrowszczaks, and he was a Polish independence activist, staff captain of the Imperial Russian Army from 1862. He was a member of the City Committee in Warsaw and then the Central National Committee. He was a general and commander-in-chief of the Paris Commune troops in 1871, and this is the activity thanks to which he is most known. Also, we've got the Adam Mickiewicz Brigade, named after Adam Mickiewicz, considered by many as the greatest Polish poet, but he was not only a poet, he was also a political activist, a publicist, a translator, a philosopher, religious activist, a mystic, organizer and military commander, and also an academic teacher. And he died in 1855 organizing a help during the Crimea War, in which Russia faced a very severe defeat. There was also Jose de Palafox i Melzi, so he was better known as General Palafox, member of an old Aragonese family, defender of his native Zaragoza, which was attacked by united French-Polish forces. He was officer of the regular Spanish army, who in the beginning of the 19th century refused to cooperate with the government of Joseph Bonaparte and began to fight against the invader, and honoring the Polish battalion with his name was intended to correct past mistakes, because Palafox fought against the French and the Poles. So the correction of past mistakes, and it was also strongly emphasized that this time, during the Spanish Civil War, Poles were fighting on the right side. And also we've got Taras Shevchenko. He was a patron of the Ukrainian battalion, and he was a Ukrainian national poet, ethnographer, folklorist, painter, representative of Romanticism, and political activist, so a very similar figure to Adam Mickiewicz, and for the Ukrainian he meant the same as Mickiewicz for the Polish people. We've got right here also the patron of this mentioned Jewish unit, which was Naftali Botwin, and this is a quite controversial figure. He was a member of the Zukunft organization, so this was another youth sympathizer of the Bund. He was also an activist of the Polish communist movement, because some of the people went from supporting Bund to supporting the communist, and Naftali Botwin was the example of such people, of such person. He was a member of the Union of Communist Youth in Poland, and later the Communist Party of Western Ukraine. He came from a very poor family, was the sixth of 8 children, lost his father at the age of 3, had to left elementary school after 3 years of studying. In order to support his family as a worker, he became a member of the leather industry workers union. On July 28, 1925, following the party's order, he shot and killed an officer of the Polish defensiva, Józef Cechnowski, when he was present in a court in Lviv. So this defensiva was an organizational unit of the General Staff of the Polish Army dealing with intelligence. And it has infiltrated the Polish communists and handed over to the Polish government over 4 of its members. And Cechnowski survived the assassination attempts by multiple persons. Władysław Hibner, Władysław Kniewski, and Henryk Rutkowski had already tried to kill him 11 days earlier, before Botwin was finally successful. And Botwin, after the execution, after this successful assassination attempt, was sentenced to death by summary court in Lviv and later executed. So he was portrayed either as a hero or a negative character, depending on who was on which side of the political option. And obviously, for the political left, he was considered as a hero, and for the right, for the nationalists, for the supporter of the Polish government, he was considered as a murderer. Right here you can see another document. It is written in Yiddish, so this is the announcement on the establishment of the Naftali Botwin campaign, and I also managed to translate it for you. So, emphasizing the great number and importance of Jewish volunteers in the Dąbrowski Brigade, as well as honoring the memory of Jewish fighters who fell in the fight for freedom, we designate the second company of the heroic Polish Palafox Battalion as a Jewish company and named after Naftali Botwin. His name was a symbol, an example of heroic struggle of the Jewish masses for your and our freedom. So this is that important slogan that I mentioned to you before, a symbol of international solidarity and the bond that unites nations. Also, there is a quote written by Gershon Dua Borgen, one of the political commissars. Your company symbolizes the heroic struggle of thousands of Jewish soldiers in Spain. For the Jewish masses, you represent everything that is most beautiful and heroic in the fight against fascism. And right here we've got another artifact from this collection. Is a postage stamp issued in support of Jewish volunteers from the Botwin company and for their families from spring 1938. And on the photo we can see the first commander of the campaign, Karol Gutman, and there is an inscription: Gutman, the first Jewish commander of Botwin Company, support the soldiers and their families. And this company also has its own media outlet. It was called the Botwin Zeitung, the bulletin of the Naftali Botwin campaign. So the first issue was released on December 30th, 1937, and there were 6 issues published altogether, all of which are in this archival collection. Members of the international brigades, every unit has got its own songs. And I managed to gather for you some examples of such songs. And one of the examples is the March of the Dąbrowszczaks, written by Anatol Natanczak, who himself was of Jewish origin, and also I managed to translate it for you from Polish to English. And this song, this march is as follows. Forward, working team, fight for the freedom of Spain. Today we may have to die, or tomorrow we may be free. Not one of us will be missing to destroy and crush the fascists. To the front, Dąbrowski Brigade, raise your banner of freedom. Forward, bravely to the finish line. All as one to arms. Worker, peasant, and Soviets, they give us a brotherly hand. And when we finish this battle and the enemy is destroyed, we will change the rifle for a working hammer and a plow. So there is obviously a propaganda element. Another example is a song titled People of Spain, So Close to Our Hearts. It was written by Oleg Nus, who also was of Jewish origin. And another song also written by Oleg Nus is titled Huesca, and it is dedicated to the heroes of our last attack. And the Battle of Huesca was one of the last battles in which the Botwin company participated. And right here there is a fragment of a testimony written by Marian Borenstein. So this is about the Battle of Estremadura. The road from Los Blasgnes to similar-looking settlement of Peralda led through narrow roads of the Rocky Mountains of Extremadura. Nature was harsh and hard there, just as harsh and hard was the life of the Spanish poor, nesting in dark caves carved into the limestone slopes. Along the way one can see scattered small towns similar to each other in their primitive style. Monotony and hopeless perspective, overshadowed only by more impressive buildings such as churches and monasteries, looking more like fortified fortresses than houses of prayer. The road in the mountains seems deceptively close, and yet in order to get from one peak to another, which you can almost reach with your hand, you have to cover many kilometers. It was not easy for the Dąbrowski Brigade to cover 60 kilometers in one day with full combat gear. There were many new soldiers here preparing for battle for the first time, among them the reserve campaign of Botwin, formed and trained in Casas Ibanez, the training center for the international brigades, arrived at the front to cover with glory, together with old fighters from the linear campaign of Botwin, the company's banner, brought as a gift from the Paris Society for the Jewish fighters. The lakes of young men from Miła and Smocza streets in Warsaw, from the Parisian Belleville, so this is a typical working class neighborhood, or the asphalt streets of Tel Aviv, had never marched like this before. They had not known the mountains of Spain. However, when Botwin's leading group arrived in Paraleda late in the evening, they did not recognize the road. The fatigue disappeared. Yeah, so this is a characteristic example of epic narrative about volunteers fighting in the international brigades. In accounts such as the one that was mentioned, the volunteers, even though they were worse equipped, worse armed, and less numerous than Franco's forces and the forces of his collaborators, mostly from Third Reich and Italy, they achieved spectacular successes on and off the battlefront. Even the most serious challenges turned out to be easy to overcome. Also, the Botwin Company banner is mentioned here, that, as I told you before, is being kept at the Jewish Historical Institute. There is a note about the social origin of the volunteers. They came from the Warsaw Jewish district, from Paris working neighborhoods, from Palestine, and so on. But there were some cracks in this epic narrative, and a letter written by Erlich Pincus to an unnamed friend in Paris, undated, but I suppose that it was written after 1939, as an example of this mentioned cracks. And this letter is as follows. Dear comrade listener, when I left Spain, while I was in the camps, I lost my memoirs and photographs I had from there. I have forgotten a lot when I arrived in Spain at the beginning of October 1936 in Albacete, where we had completed 3 weeks of military exercises. General Franco and General Mora threw out leaflets stating that on November 7th they would be drinking coffee in Madrid, so we went to the front near the University District and prevented them from drinking coffee in Madrid. We ourselves were the one drinking coffee there. Unfortunately, and this is a very important fragment underlined in red, it must be said that on December 31st, so in the New Year's Eve day, in 1936, Comrade Karol from the Woodworkers Union from Paris was killed by a drunk Pole from our unit. And while most of these types of documents do follow the mentioned epic narrative and are decidedly propagandistic in nature, with a few exceptions, it is important to present what the reality of war in fact looked like. So the Botwin battalion exercises took place in Albacete. This base had training centers, supply depots, hospitals in Murcia and surrounding towns. The company began participating in combat on February 12, 1938 in Sierra Cuamada near Behr al-Ghazal, stopping the advance of nationalistic troops and suffering heavy losses there. The battalion fought its next battle at Belchite on March 12, 1938. The greatest losses were suffered in the battles for Hill 281 on the Ebro, Extremadura front, with only 18 people surviving out of 120 soldiers. After these events, the battalion received the Medalla de Valor from the Republican government, and the battalion, the Naftali Botwin battalion, also took part in the battles for Lerida in April 1938. The battles near the Ebro River, which began in September 1938, ended with the almost complete annihilation of the Botwin company. All the wounded were shot later by the enemy. So a total of about 150 to 170 Jewish volunteers fought in the battalion. The military and political leadership was held by Jews. The original composition consisted of about 80 Spaniards, 10 Poles, and 10 Jews. Large personal losses were supplemented by the Spaniards, and it was a common circumstance also in other units. There are unconfirmed information about the recruitment of a repentant German soldier who had gone over to the side of Republic, but it is, as I mentioned, unconfirmed. It could be some kind of a myth or legend or anecdote. And there were frequent changes in leadership. Among others, the first commander, Karol Gutman, the one presented on the stamp, did not survive the Spanish Civil War. And also important is what happened after the Spanish Civil War. So in the autumn of 1938, the international brigades were disbanded. Thousands of members of the brigades returned to France. Many of them were sent to internment camps. During the war, some of them were active in the resistance, while others joined the Polish army in the west or east. Others, such as the Mołojc brothers or Grzegorz Korczyński, created the structures of the Polish Workers' Party and occupied Poland. After the war, however, many Spaniards, as they were called, were found among the creators of the power departments of the communist Poland. For example, Jan Rutkowski became head of the infamous military information. Henryk Toruńczyk headed the internal security corps, and Wacław Komar, with a large group of veterans from the brigades, built the Polish military intelligence. And there is very important additional information that can give you more context, because the around 30th anniversary celebrations of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War indeed took place, but the anti-Semitic campaign that happened in March 1968 caused other initiatives, such as a full-scale historical study on Jewish volunteers of the international brigades, to be cancelled. And many former fighters who held important positions within the communistic party or law enforcement apparatus or the military, after the end of Second World War in post-war Soviet-controlled Poland, were labeled cosmopolitans and considered as spies or Zionists due to their prolonged stay abroad and Jewish origins, and in consequence demoted, degraded, or forced to emigration. And this was also the fate of, among other, the initiator of the collection at the Jewish Historical Institute, Edward Wózek, who had to emigrate later to France.